October 20th, 1943, 3:47 a.m. A knock on the door. A woman who chose silence over survival. And 2,500 names that refuse to be erased. That's the story of Irena Sendler, the woman who saved 2,500 children and was forgotten for 60 years. Don't let it happen again. This story is based on verified historical records, testimonies from survivors, and archives from Yad Vashem, the Polish underground, and Gestapo. Irena Sendlerova was a real person. The 2,500 children were real. The torture was real. The silence was real. And so is the lesson. One person can change the world, even if the world doesn't notice.
October 20th, 1943. The knock was polite, almost gentle. 3 soft taps on the wooden door of apartment 14, Ludwiki Street. But Irena Sendlerova knew. The Gestapo doesn't knock twice. She had maybe 20 seconds before they broke down the door. 20 seconds to hide the evidence. 20 seconds to save 2,500 lives. But there was no evidence to hide. No lists in her apartment, no addresses, no photographs, no maps. Just a woman, 33 years old, a social worker, thin from hunger, exhausted from 3 years of war, and buried 3 feet deep in a garden half a mile away under an apple tree that would not survive the winter, hidden in milk jars and vodka bottles wrapped in waxed paper. 2,500 names. Children who were supposed to disappear, erased by policy, deleted from existence, forgotten by history. But Irena Sendler had written their names down, every single one. And now the Gestapo had come for her. The door exploded inward, not on the 4th knock, on the 3rd. They didn't wait. 3 men, black coats, pistols drawn. The tallest one, later she would learn his name was Klaus Weber, a bureaucrat from Hamburg who specialized in interrogating women, grabbed her by the hair and slammed her face against the kitchen table. "Irena Sendlerova?" She tasted blood. "Yes. You are under arrest for crimes against the Reich, aiding Jews, falsifying documents, conspiracy." They didn't ask if she was guilty. They already knew. Someone had talked. Paviak Prison, October 20th, 1943, 11:32 a.m. The interrogation room smelled like rust and fear. Irena sat in a wooden chair, hands cuffed behind her back, staring at the man across the table. Weber, the bureaucrat. He wasn't screaming. He wasn't angry. He was calm. That was worse. "We know what you've been doing, Frau Sendlerova." He placed a folder on the table, opened it slowly. Inside, photographs, documents, reports. Her face in a dozen surveillance photos. Walking into the ghetto, walking out, always with the yellow armband, the social services badge. "You've been smuggling Jewish children out of the ghetto." It wasn't a question. "I'm a social worker. I treat sick children." "Sick children don't disappear, Frau Sendlerova." He pulled out a sheet of paper, typewritten, names. Since January 1942, 347 Jewish children had vanished from the ghetto registry. No deaths recorded, no transfers, Just gone. He looked up at her. Where are they? Irena said nothing. Weber leaned forward. We don't want the children, Frau Sendlerova. They're already dead, whether they're in the ghetto or hiding in some Polish peasant's barn. We want the network, the names, the people helping you. Silence. Who drives the ambulances? Who falsifies the documents? Which priests are hiding them? Which families? Irena stared at the wall behind him. Weber sighed. I want to be clear about something. This is not a negotiation. You will tell us everything. The only question is how much pain you endure before you do. He stood, walked to the door, knocked twice. 2 guards entered. One of them carried an iron bar. Weber put on his coat. I have a meeting at 2 o'clock. I'll be back at 4. By then, I expect you'll be more cooperative. He left. The door closed, and the beating began.
They broke her legs first. Not quickly, slowly, methodically. 1 blow to the right shin, wait for the scream to stop, then another. The sound was wrong, too sharp, too final. Bone doesn't break cleanly. It splinters. It cracks like wood under pressure. She heard it before she felt it. And when the pain came, it was white. Absolute. A void that swallowed thought. She screamed until her voice gave out. Then she screamed silently. The guards didn't speak. They weren't angry. They weren't cruel. They were just doing their job. At 2:47 p.m., Weber returned. Irena was still conscious. Barely. Where are the children? Her lips moved. No sound came out. Weber crouched beside her. I admire your commitment, Frau Sendlerova. I do. But you must understand, this is pointless. You're going to tell us. Everyone does. The only variable is how much of you remains intact when you finally break. He stood, nodded to the guards. Continue. They moved to her feet. She didn't break. Not that day, not the next, not the day after that. They shattered both feet, pulled her nails, burned her arms with cigarettes, beat her until she couldn't distinguish between pain and existence. And through it all, she said nothing. Because she understood something the Gestapo didn't. Pain ends. Death ends. But if she spoke, 2,500 children would die. And their names, written on scraps of paper, hidden in glass jars, buried in a garden, would be erased forever. So she chose silence. Not because she was brave, but because the alternative was unthinkable. On October 27, 1933, 7 days after her arrest, Irena Sendlerova was sentenced to death. Execution scheduled for November 3rd. She had 1 week left to live. And still, she hadn't said a single name. To understand why she didn't break, you need to go back. Not to her birth, not to her childhood, but to the day she realized that silence could kill as surely as violence. November 16, 1940, the day they built the walls. Warsaw before the ghetto was a city of 3.5 million people. Jews and Poles lived side by side. Not always peacefully, not always fairly, but they lived. Irena Sendler was born in 1910 to a Catholic family in Otwick, a small town outside Warsaw. Her father, Stanisław Krzyżanowski, was a doctor. Not a famous doctor, not a wealthy doctor,
just a man who believed that medicine had no politics. In 1917, when a typhus epidemic swept through the Jewish quarter of Otwick, most Polish doctors refused to treat Jewish patients. Too dangerous, they said, too contagious, not worth the risk. Stanislaw went anyway. Every day, for 3 months, he walked into homes where death was waiting. He treated families who couldn't pay him. He held the hands of children whose parents were already dead. And in February 1917, Stanislaw Krzyzewski contracted typhus. He died 12 days later. Irena was 7 years old. At her funeral, dozens of Jewish families came to pay their respects. They told young Irena, "Your father was a good man. He didn't see religion. He saw people." She never forgot that. 23 years later, in 1940, when the Nazis built walls around the Jewish quarter of Warsaw and declared it a ghetto, Irena remembered her father's words. He didn't see religion. He saw people. And the people inside those walls were dying.
November 16, 1940. The ghetto was sealed. Overnight, 400,000 Jewish residents of Warsaw were forced into an area of 1.3 square miles, surrounded by walls 10 feet high, topped with barbed wire and broken glass. One entrance, one exit, guarded by German soldiers with orders to shoot anyone trying to leave. The official ration inside the ghetto was 184 calories per day, barely enough to sustain a child, nowhere near enough for an adult. Within 6 months, people were starving in the streets. Irena worked for the Warsaw Social Welfare Department. Her job was to provide aid to families in need. But in 1940, under Nazi occupation, aid meant different things depending on who you were. Polish families received food coupons, medical care, financial assistance. Jewish families received nothing. It was policy. Irena ignored the policy. In December 1940, she applied for a special permit to enter the ghetto. She claimed she needed to inspect sanitary conditions, check for typhus outbreaks, document disease spread. The Germans approved it. They wanted records. They wanted documentation. They wanted to know exactly how many Jews were dying. What they didn't know was that Irena Sendler had no intention of just documenting death. She was going to fight it. January 3, 1941, Irena's first day inside the ghetto. She walked through the gate at Lesno Street, wearing her white armband with the blue Star of David, her social services badge pinned to her coat. The smell hit her first. Decay, sewage, desperation. Bodies lay in the streets, not hidden, not covered, just there. Old men, women, children, too many to bury. The living stepped around them. A boy, maybe 6 years old, sat against a wall staring at nothing. His ribs were visible through his shirt. His eyes were hollow. Irena knelt beside him. "What's your name?" The boy didn't respond. She reached into her bag, pulled out a piece of bread, and handed it to him. He grabbed it, devoured it in seconds, then looked up at her with an expression she would never forget. Not gratitude, hope. The hope that there might be more. There wasn't. Irena had brought 12 pieces of bread. There were thousands of starving children. She stood, walked deeper into the ghetto, and realized something that would change everything. She couldn't save them all. But maybe she could save some.
For months, Irena smuggled food and medicine into the ghetto. Small amounts, hidden in her coat, in her bag, in her boots. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. But it was something. Then, in July 1942, everything changed. The deportations began. The Nazis announced a resettlement program. Jewish families would be relocated to work camps in the East. It was a lie. The trains didn't go to work camps. They went to Treblinka, a death camp 80 miles northeast of Warsaw. Between July and September 1942, 300,000 Jews were deported from the Warsaw Ghetto. Fewer than 100 survived. Irena watched the trains leave, watched families torn apart, watched children screaming for parents who were already dead. And she made a decision. If the adults couldn't be saved, at least the children could. September 1942. Irena joined Żegota, the Council to Aid Jews, an underground organization funded by the Polish government in exile, dedicated to saving Jewish lives. They had resources, forged documents, safe houses, money. What they didn't have was access to the ghetto. Irena did. Her social services permit allowed her to enter and exit freely. She could go where others couldn't. So she proposed something radical. Smuggle children out of the ghetto, one at a time. Hide them with Polish families, give them new names, new identities, new lives. The Żegota leaders were skeptical. They asked, how? The Germans search every vehicle leaving the ghetto. I'll find a way, Irena said. And if you're caught? Then I'm caught. They gave her 2 weeks to prove it could work. She needed only one. September 15th, 1942. Irena entered the ghetto with a plan. She'd spent the previous week talking to families, quietly, carefully. She found a mother named Hanna Rechtman, a widow. Her husband had been shot during a roundup in June. She had a daughter, Elżbieta, 3 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes. Hanna was dying, tuberculosis, maybe 2 months left. Irena sat with her in a cramped apartment on Gęsia Street. I can take her out, Irena said. Hanna stared at her daughter, sleeping on a mattress in the corner. Where? At a family outside the city, a farm. They'll raise her as their own. Will she remember me? I don't know. Hanna closed her eyes. If she stays here, she dies. You know that. Silence. And then, quietly, take her. You're sure? Hanna looked at Irena, tears running down her face. No. But do it anyway.
September 16th, 1942. 6:15 a.m. Irena walked through the ghetto gate, carrying a wooden toolbox. Inside the toolbox, wrenches, screwdrivers, hammers, standard maintenance equipment. And beneath the false bottom, wrapped in a blanket, sedated with a small dose of luminol, Elżbieta Rechtman, 3 years old, asleep. The guard at the checkpoint glanced at Irena's badge, waved her through without searching the box. She walked 3 blocks, hands shaking, heart pounding, waited until she was out of sight, opened the toolbox. Elżbieta was still breathing.
Irena carried her to a waiting car, handed her to a woman named Maria Kukulska, a Żegota operative. Her name is Elżbieta Rechtman. She's 3 years old. Her mother is Hanna. Write it down. Maria wrote it on a scrap of paper. What do we do with this? Keep it. When the war ends, we'll find her family. And if her family is dead, then at least she'll know who she was. Maria drove away. Irena stood on the street corner watching the car disappear. She had just saved one child. 2,499 to go. The system evolved quickly. Irena couldn't use the same method twice. The Germans weren't stupid. If they saw the same social worker leaving with the same toolbox every day, they'd get suspicious. So she adapted. Method 1. Ambulances. Irena worked with a driver named Piotr Zettinger, a member of Żegota, a man who understood that some cargo was worth dying for. They would enter the ghetto with an ambulance marked with a red cross, load a child, sedated, hidden under medical supplies, or inside a coffin labeled typhus. The Germans were terrified of typhus. They rarely inspected those vehicles. Method 2. The courthouse. The ghetto bordered the old Warsaw courthouse. There was a small door connecting the two buildings, technically illegal to use, but Irena bribed the guard. She would bring children through the courthouse, dress them in Polish clothes, walk them out the front entrance as if they were visiting relatives. Method 3. The church. St. Benin's church stood on the edge of the ghetto. Father Marceli Godlewski allowed Irena to use the basement as a hiding place. Children would be smuggled through a gap in the wall, hidden in the church for days, then moved to safe houses across the city. Method 4. The sewers. The riskiest method, but sometimes the only option. Irena worked with a man named Józef Zitzman, a former engineer who knew the sewer system beneath Warsaw. Older children, 7, 8, 9 years old, could walk through the tunnels, guided by Józef, emerging miles away, filthy and terrified, but alive.
Every child who left the ghetto received a new identity. Jewish names were replaced with Polish ones, surnames changed, birth dates altered, entire histories rewritten. Elżbieta Rechtman became Anna Wójcika. Jakub Feinstein became Tomasz Nowak. Sarah Bielski became Zofia Kowalczyk. But Irena did something the Nazis didn't expect. She kept a record. Every child's real name, real birth date, real parents, written in code on cigarette paper, rolled into small tubes, sealed in glass jars. She buried them in her friend's garden, under that apple tree on Letkarska Street. Because Irena understood something fundamental. The Nazis wanted to erase these children, not just kill them, erase them, remove them from history, make it as if they had never existed. But if their names survived, they survived, even if only on paper. By December 1942, Irena had saved 400 children. By March 1943, 800. By July 1943, 1,500. The work was exhausting, dangerous, soul-crushing. For every child saved, 10 were left behind. For every success, there were failures. March 18, 1943. Irena was transporting a 6-month-old boy named Mikhail, hidden in a coffin. The plan was simple: ambulance, checkpoint, delivery. But Mikhail woke up. The sedative wore off too soon, and he started crying.
They were 50 meters from the checkpoint. The guard heard it. He walked toward the ambulance, hand on his pistol. "What's that noise?" Irena's mind went blank. Then instinct took over. She started barking, loud, aggressive, like a rabid dog. The guard stopped, confused. Irena pointed at the coffin, then at her rabies vaccination papers, shouted in broken German about infection protocols, quarantine procedures, danger. The guard stepped back, disgusted, waved them through. She drove past, hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the wheel. Mikhail stopped crying. Irena pulled over 2 blocks away, opened the coffin, picked him up. He looked at her with wide eyes, and she realized something. He had no idea how close he'd just come to dying.
Not every child made it out. April 4th, 1943. A girl named Rivka, 7 years old, dark hair, big eyes, terrified. The plan: hide her in a sack of potatoes, carry her through the courthouse. But Rivka panicked, started moving, made noise. The guard heard. Opened the sack. Irena's heart stopped. "It's just potatoes." "Open it." She opened it. Rivka stared up at her, eyes filled with tears. The guard pulled his pistol, shot her. Once, in the head. Rivka died instantly. The guard turned to Irena. "If I see you again, you die too." Irena didn't respond. She couldn't. She walked out of the ghetto, numb, hollow. That night she wrote Rivka's name on a piece of paper, added it to the jar, because even in death, she deserved to be remembered. By October 1943, Irena had saved 2,497 children. She was exhausted, terrified, barely sleeping. Every time she entered the ghetto, she wondered if this would be the day she got caught. Every time she left, she was surprised she was still alive. Her friends in Jagata begged her to stop. "You've done enough. Let someone else take over." But Irena couldn't stop, because for every child she saved, she saw 100 she couldn't, and the guilt was unbearable. October 19, 1943, Irena smuggled out her 25th 100th child, a boy named Adam, 4 years old, the son of a rabbi. She used the sewer method, guided by Yosef, through the tunnels into the night. When they emerged on Prosta Street, Adam was shivering, covered in filth, but alive. Irena handed him to a waiting operative. "His name is Adam Levin. Write it down." She walked home, climbed the stairs to her apartment, opened the door, and for the first time in 3 years, allowed herself to feel something close to pride. 2,500 children, 2,500 lives that wouldn't be erased. She went to bed, and 6 hours later, the Gestapo came for her. Someone had talked. To this day, no one knows who: a neighbor, a jealous colleague, a captured Zygota member under torture. It doesn't matter. The result was the same. October 20th, 1943, 3:47 a.m. The knock on the door, and everything Irena had built, every name, every promise, every child, hung in the balance. If she broke under torture, if she gave them the locations of the safe houses, the names of the families, the identity of her operatives, every child would be rounded up, sent to Treblinka, erased. So when Weber asked her, "Where are the children?" she said nothing. When they broke her legs, she said nothing. When they shattered her feet, she said nothing. Because 2,500 lives were heavier than one woman's bones. October 27th, 1943, Irena was sentenced to death. Execution, November 3rd. She had 1 week left. In her cell in Paviak prison, she could barely move. Her legs were ruined, her feet destroyed, every breath hurt. But she was alive. And more importantly, she hadn't talked. The children were still safe. On January 17, 1943, a guard came to her cell. "You have a visitor." Irena was confused. Prisoners condemned to death didn't get visitors. The guard opened the door. A woman entered. Irena didn't recognize her. The woman leaned close, whispered in Polish, "Tomorrow morning, you'll be taken to the courtyard for execution. The guard on duty has been paid. When you reach the wall, run to the left. There's a gap. Someone will be waiting." Then she left. Irena sat in her cell processing what she'd just heard. Zygota was going to save her. November 3, 1943, 6 a.m. 2 guards came for her, dragged her from the cell. Her legs couldn't support her weight. They pulled her through the corridors, into the courtyard. 10 other prisoners stood against the wall, condemned, waiting. Irena was placed at the end of the line. An officer read the charges, the sentences, then gave the order. "Prepare." The soldiers raised their rifles. Irena looked to her left, saw the gap in the wall, 20 feet away. She couldn't run. Her legs were broken. But she could crawl. "Aim!" The guard beside her, the one who'd been bribed, stepped slightly to the side, blocking the line of fire. "Fire!" Gunshots. The prisoners fell. Except Irena. The guard shoved her hard. She collapsed, rolled toward the gap. Hands grabbed her, pulled her through, voices shouting in German. But she was already gone, dragged into a waiting car, driven through the streets of Warsaw. By the time the Germans realized what had happened, Irena Sendler was dead, at least according to official records. Her name was added to the list of executed prisoners, filed, forgotten. And Irena, now using the false identity Klara Dąbrowska, disappeared into hiding. She would remain hidden for the next 16 months until January 17, 1945, when the Soviet Army liberated Warsaw.
The war ended. The ghetto was gone. The walls torn down. The ovens silenced. And Irena Sendler, legs shattered, identity stolen, returned to the garden on Lekarska Street. January 20th, 1945. She dug, with her hands, in the frozen ground, beneath the apple tree that had somehow survived, and found them. The jars, intact. She opened the first one, unrolled the cigarette paper. Names, dates, addresses. 2,500 children. 2,500 promises kept. She spent the next 6 months trying to reconnect children with their families, but most of the families were dead. Parents gassed at Treblinka, grandparents shot in the streets, siblings starved in the ghetto. Of the 2,500 children Irena saved, fewer than 200 ever found surviving relatives. The rest became orphans, raised by the Polish families who had hidden them, given new lives, new names. And Irena had to accept something unbearable. She had saved their lives, but she couldn't save their identities. The children she rescued didn't remember being Jewish, didn't remember their real names, didn't remember their parents. The Nazis had lost the war, but in a way, they'd won anyway. After the war, Irena returned to social work, helped rebuild Warsaw, married, had children of her own. She never spoke about what she'd done. The new Polish government, communist, controlled by Moscow, wasn't interested in her story. She wasn't a party member, wasn't a communist hero, just a woman who helped Jews. That wasn't the narrative they wanted. So Irena Sendler, the woman who saved 2,500 children, faded into obscurity. She lived in a small apartment in Warsaw, Her legs never healed properly. She walked with a cane for the rest of her life. Every step was a reminder.
In 1965, Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial in Israel, recognized Irena as righteous among the nations. A small ceremony, a medal, some recognition. But outside of Poland and Israel, no one knew her name. In 1983, she was interviewed by a Polish filmmaker. She told her story, on camera, for the record. The film was shelved, never released. By the 1990s, Irena Sendler was in her 80s, living alone, almost blind, struggling financially. And then, in 1999, something unexpected happened. 4 teenage girls from a small town in Kansas were given a history project. Find an unsung hero. Tell their story. One of the girls, Megan Stewart, stumbled across a brief mention of Irena Sendler in an old history book. Irena Sendler saved 2,500 Jewish children from the Warsaw Ghetto. Megan thought it was a typo. 2,500? That couldn't be right. That was more than Schindler, more than Wallenberg, more than anyone. She researched further. It wasn't a typo. It was true. The 4 girls, Megan Stewart, Elizabeth Cambers, Sabrina Coons, and Jessica Shelton, wrote a play called Life in a Jar. They performed it at their high school in Uniontown, Kansas, then at a local theater, then at a conference. And slowly, impossibly, the story spread. Journalists picked it up, television crews, international media. And in 2001, 2 of the girls traveled to Warsaw to meet Irena. She was 91 years old, frail, confined to a wheelchair. But when she saw them, she smiled. "You came all this way to see me? You saved 2,500 children," Megan said. "The world should know." Irena shook her head. "I could have done more." In 2003, Pope John Paul II wrote her a personal letter, thanking her, honoring her. In 2007, she was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. She lost to Al Gore. When reporters asked her how she felt about losing, she said, "I don't understand why people are making such a fuss. I just did what anyone would have done." But that wasn't true. Most people didn't do what Irena did. Most people looked away. May 12, 2008, Warsaw, Poland. Irena Sendler died in her sleep. She was 98 years old. Her funeral was held at All Saints Church. Hundreds attended. Among them, men and women in their 60s and 70s. The children she had saved. They stood in the rain, holding photographs of the grandchildren they'd had because Irena gave them life. One man, Eliezer Ziegelbaum, saved in 1942 as a 6-year-old, spoke at the service. "He gave me everything. My name, my life, my children, my future. I don't know how to thank her for that. So I'll just say, we remember."
we will always remember. They buried Irena in Powązk's cemetery, next to her parents. Her gravestone is simple. Irena Sendler, 1910-2008. Righteous among the nations. But the inscription doesn't tell the full story. It doesn't mention the 2,500 names, the jars, the torture, the silence. It doesn't say that she saved more Jewish children than almost anyone in history. It doesn't say that the world forgot her for 60 years.
Today, if you visit Warsaw, you can find a small memorial to Irena Sendler. It's on Pilsudski Square. A bronze statue, a woman holding children. Tourists walk past it without stopping, without knowing who she was. But the children know, and their children know, and their children's children. Because of Irena, more than 6,000 people exist today who shouldn't. 6,000 descendants of the 2,500 she saved. That's her legacy. Not a statue, not a Nobel Prize, not fame, but 6,000 lives, living, breathing, existing against all odds. There's a question people always ask about Irena Sendler. Why did she do it? Why risk everything for strangers, for children who weren't hers, for people the world had decided were expendable? In 2005, a reporter asked her that question directly. Her answer was simple. Every child saved with my help is the justification of my existence on this earth, and not a title to glory. She didn't do it for recognition. She didn't do it for history. She didn't do it to be remembered. She did it because children were dying, and she could help. So she did. That's not heroism. That's humanity. And maybe that's the most important lesson of Irena Sendler's life. Heroes aren't people who do the impossible. They're people who do the necessary. Even when it's terrifying. Even when it's dangerous. Even when no one is watching. In a garden in Warsaw, there's an apple tree. It's not the original. That tree died decades ago. But a new one was planted in its place. By the children. By the grandchildren. And beneath it, a small plaque. Here, Irena Sendler buried the names of 2,500 children, so they would not be forgotten. The names are gone now, returned to the families, reclaimed by history. But the earth remembers, and so do we.